Good evening, everyone. My name is Patty Roberts. I am the Deputy Director with the City of Port St. Lucie Parks and Recreation Department, and I am also the current chairperson of the Treasure Coast Opioid Task Force. And I am honored and privileged to be here this evening to present yet again another session of HealthyU, a series of conversations. And tonight's topic is on opioid epidemic awareness. We do a public forum here in the City of Port St. Lucie in our department every year to raise awareness to this disease and to reduce the stigma of those who are afflicted with it. So I do want to go over just a few housekeeping items before we start. At the registration table, there is a voluntary sign-in sheet. Again, I stress the word voluntary for anyone who wants to sign in. And then there will be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the series. What I will mention this session is being recorded. So it will be available on the city's website. Give us about 1 to 2 weeks to get that on the city's website. But as such, when there is a question, I will repeat, when you ask a question, I will repeat it so that it's being recorded. And then we'll have the doctor or whomever answer that question, okay? But I have to repeat it into the microphone. Restrooms are located right out these doors here and to the left. And just ask our guest services if you need anything further from that. We do have some coffee, water, and snacks over on the table, so please help yourself to that. But just a brief background before we bring on the true expert and star of the evening. HealthyU is a program that is very near and dear to my heart. The topics that we've discussed in this series of conversations, and certainly over the next remaining months, are ones that are very real, very sensitive, and tough to talk about. We talk about depression, we talk about anxiety, we talk about domestic violence, trauma-informed care, suicide prevention, and today, opioid epidemic awareness. Those are tough conversations to have, trust me, I know they are. But if they're never talked about, we are never educated on what it is. And trust me, none of these topics that I just talked about, Patty does not present on those. I'm not the subject matter expert on depression or domestic violence. We have high quality, giving, generous nonprofit people in mental health providers on the Treasure Coast who give of their time to come share their expertise on the topics. But if they're never talked about, then we are not educated, and the stigma out there remains. So, and this story never gets easier, but just 1,444 days ago, and yes, I still count days, a police officer who, very similar to the young man down on the right here, knocked on my door to share with us that our 22-year-old son, Danny Roberts, had died right here in Port St. Lucie. It will be 4 years ago on the 18th of this month. And he had died of a heroin overdose that was laced with fentanyl. And again, happened right in Port St. Lucie. They transported him over to Port St. Lucie Medical Hospital, and that is where he died. But we'll learn more about Danny's story and his journey a little bit later after we understand the true disease that really is addiction and opioid misuse disorder. So to understand the disease, and I'll tell you, this has been a journey for me. I am not medical, I'm not law enforcement, I'll be the first to tell you that. But the woman who has been my mentor and has schooled me on what addiction really is the lady over here who's going to be presenting the glut of this presentation, if you will. And I'm gonna bring her up right now. Her name is Dr. Deb Dreyer. She is the former chairperson of the Treasure Coast Opioid Task Force. She's a St. Lucie County resident and a medical professional who will share her knowledge of addiction and the opioid epidemic that is upon us today. So, Dr. Dreyer, take it away.
Okay. Is this on? Yes. I'm a nurse, not a doctor. I want to clear that up right away. I do have a doctorate, but I am a nurse. And I'm proud to be a nurse. So we're going to talk about opioid use disorder today. We're going to start off by telling you a little bit about the prevalence of opioid use disorder. I got to stand back because I'm kind of loud. Here in St. Lucie County and in Port St. Lucie, and then we're going to go on and we're going to talk about it as a brain disease, as a social disease, and not as a criminal thing or as a moral choice. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what signs to look for and then what treatment options might be available to you. So if you have a family member or you yourself are troubled with opioid use disorder, hopefully tonight will be a little bit of an eye-opener. Can you flip that? Thank you. So in 2021, there were over 100,000 deaths nationally attributed to opioids and particularly to fentanyl. It was the first time we topped 100,000. I believe it was 107,000, if I'm not mistaken. And you can check my numbers because I'm not good at this stuff. But I believe in 2021, we had 350,000 deaths from COVID. So a third of that, that's a lot of people dying from this particular disease, in my opinion. And overdoses are a leading cause of death for those under the age of 50. And the ages that we're looking at primarily, and you'll be presenting this in just a second, are people ages 24 to about 44 is where we're seeing most of the fatalities here. And nationally as well. So without further ado, if you're ready to present some of these slides, if you want to come on up here.
Let me introduce, if I may, Officer Russ Jackson from the Port St. Lucie Police Department.
Hey, how y'all doing? Glad to be here. I think this is very important. We obviously, as police officers, respond to this quite often, whether the criminal side of it or the victim side of it. And I think we've come a long way thanks to the education like Patty has brought to the city to bring out to everybody. Here you can see the citywide opiate overdose analysis. You can see from the 2019 to 2021, there has been an increase. Reported deaths, this is the breakdown from, again, January 2019 to 2022. If any time, if you have any questions, I apologize. I got added in on this with you guys. The mastermind of these slides was unable to make it, so I'm kind of filling in, so I might not be too chatty. So here, Narcan Administration, that was a big thing that was brought to our police department, that every officer is issued is Narcan. I've seen the recovery and survival rate for a lot of these people that have been experiencing overdoses. It's quite amazing how effective the Narcan is, how they can go from looking like basically they're not going to make it to just completely snapping right out of it. I can guarantee that it has saved lives, definitely. And I believe it is available at pharmacies also, so you can have it in your home. This is just a map of as far as the overdose for through the years. You can see it's widespread. It's no certain neighborhood or certain location. It's spread out throughout the city. And it affects everybody. It doesn't affect a race. It doesn't affect a gender. It affects everybody. You can see there's, yes?
If you go one county up or one county down, Martin, Indian River, are numbers similar?
The question was, if you went a county north or county south, would the numbers be similar?
Again, I think it affects every neighborhood, whether you're rich, poor. I don't think, I'd say they're probably about very similar. You're going to see higher numbers, obviously, with higher populations in different cities and jurisdictions.
Fort Pierce is on that map, but not included in your number system, correct?
Correct, yeah, we're doing, this is City of Port St. Lucie.
Is Fort Pierce
I'd say it's probably about the same. All right. How does opiate use disorder happen? Thank you.
The task force collects figures, by the way, of how many people need to be revived and how many deaths there are. I do know that the state of Florida, and this is true for all deaths, the medical examiner reports come out usually about 6 months after the fact because there's a lot of data to be collected about that. But over the years, Patty, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, we haven't seen those numbers clustered in any particular area. They're not necessarily clustered in inner cities. They're all over the place. And then before I start talking about all this, I too want to let you know that this talk for me comes from the heart. We lost our niece in Pennsylvania in 2008, so it was before the crisis really got going. And she was one of the first fentanyl cases that I heard about. That doesn't mean anything because I wasn't involved in all this then. But she had gotten some opiates from her mother, who was in a car accident and was prescribed for the pain. She had back pain and all kinds of stuff. And she was 19, and you know, she was 19, and she got into her mother's medicine cabinet, and she started taking some opiates. And then when opioids, I'm sure it was oxycodone probably, and she basically got hooked, and then she went to the street for it, and that's how she got the fentanyl. Her mother found her dead in her room with a needle in her arm. So it was a really terrible occasion for our family. And so I'm doing this partly in memory of her and to honor her, but also because I don't want to see another family go through what we went through, and particularly what my sister-in-law went through, losing her only daughter at the age of 19. So, addiction, I don't even like the word because people use that word and call people addicts, and I really don't like that word because it kind of has a negative connotation. So I prefer the word opioid use disorder, but because this definition came straight from government publications, it's a chronic relapsing disorder, and it's characterized by two things: that people continue drug seeking despite the consequences. And it is known in the medical community as a complex brain disease, not moral choice. It's a disease, and we need to treat it as such. And I hope that when we're done with this, if your heart and mind isn't there, that we're able to change your heart and mind, and that if it's already there, that you can go out and correct people when they start saying stuff that isn't true about it. So go ahead. Okay, how do we diagnose any substance use disorder? This can be alcohol, opiates, benzos, whatever. We ask all of these questions. We ask people, have you had more to drink or used drugs or drank more or longer than intended? Have you wanted to stop and to cut down but you couldn't? Have you spent a lot of time either using or getting over the effects of using? Have you wanted to use so badly you couldn't think of anything else? Have you found that using affects your home life, your family, your work, your job, all of that? Do you continue to drink? You can flip it, even though you know that it's having those kinds of effects on people. Have you given up or cut down on other activities that you used to love and used to find pleasure in because of it? Have you more than once gotten yourself into situations that are kind of dangerous, or you might have gotten hurt? Do you continue using even though you feel depressed and anxious and it's not making you feel good anymore? Do you use more than you once did? And have you found that when the effects are wearing off, you have some kind of physical symptoms? If you answer yes to some or most of those questions, then you may have a problem that you may want to get addressed. Okay. So there are many models and theories about how and why this occurs. I'm going to go through each of them except the top two, because I've already told you what I think of those. But we're going to talk briefly about genetics, a little bit more about trauma, a little bit more about brain disease, and then attachment and social identity. Genetics, trauma, and brain disease are all kind of meshed and complicated and not separable, but we'll try to do that. Okay, so we do know that there are some genes that may predispose you. If you have a family member who has an issue with a use disorder, you stand a better chance of also having an issue with a use disorder. So there are some genes involved, and we ask people when we screen them, do you have a family member who has a substance use disorder, either alcohol or opiates or other drugs? So we know there's a genetic connection for sure. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that. Trauma and brain development. This is a little bit newer in the theoretical range. Go ahead. So I'm going to teach you a little bit about the brain. You probably already know this, but if you don't, it's borderline interesting. So first of all, when you're born, you're not born with all the brain cells you need, primarily because you'd never get through the birth canal. Your head would be too big, and if you've ever given birth, you don't want any babies with bigger heads than they already have. So brain cells develop again after birth and up until about the age of 5. And our brain begins to develop from bottom to top and back to front. Now, the bottom of your brain is the part that deals with breathing and your heart rate and the stuff that basically keeps you alive. The front is the part of the brain up here that is your cortex, and that's where you think. Now, all of you probably already know that, but what you may not know, or you might want to keep in mind as we talk, is that our brains, our cortex, we're not fully developed until we're into our low 20s. I tell police officers this when I train them in CIT, and I ask, how many of you are under 25? And I always get a few that are under 25. And I say, well, your brain's not well enough developed yet, but we'll let that go. So, but the point behind this is that some of our younger people that are getting involved, like my niece, who was only 19, really didn't have a fully developed cortex, and that's where we're able to figure out the consequences, the longer-term consequences of our behavior, and where we're able to think through, how is this going to affect me before we start making decisions? So there's that. Okay, you can go on. That's all I'm going to say about that. I always use a brain-hand model to try to explain this. So if you put your right hand up, and again, when I do this with the police, they go, you're not going to make me swear to something, and I always say, no. So if you think of your hand as a model of the brain, and this will help you with other stuff besides opioid use disorder, think of your wrist area as being your sort of reptilian brain. We all have lizards here in Florida. I came from Pennsylvania, and I couldn't believe how many lizards were around. But you know how they move quickly, and they're just in survival mode. They don't have a thinking brain. They have just a brain that keeps them breathing, regulates their blood temperature because they're cold-blooded, but whatever. So that's the part of the brain that you don't even think about. It makes sure you breathe and makes sure your heart beats. If you fold your thumb over, that's the middle part of your brain, deep down in there, and that's the part of the brain that's mostly emotional. So if you're really angry, have you ever been really angry and someone tries to reason with you? Tell me you have. We all get like that. You can't reason with someone that's thinking with this part of their brain. You just can't. But important in the understanding of opioid use disorder is this part of the brain is what houses the reward system, the part of the brain that experiences the opioids at first as being pleasurable and being experiences of ecstasy. And then if you fold your hand over, that would be your cortex, the part of the brain that thinks. And what happens with substance use disorder, I always say, is this part of the brain is kind of popped off. People are thinking with their reward system, they're thinking with their emotional system, and they're thinking like all of us when we get really, really angry and we don't want to hear any logic, okay? So what does that mean to you? If you have somebody at home with a substance use disorder and all you do is preach at them about how it's wrong and it's going to kill you and it's not a good thing, you're using logic. You're using this part of the brain and you're talking to this part of their brain. And they're sitting there going, when can I get out of here because I got to go get my drug, or I want to go out and drink, or I want to go out and do whatever it is I want to do. So that's the brain model. Okay. Trauma. How does trauma play in there? Next one. Okay. I am a nurse, but I taught second grade for a while because I got sick of being a nurse. And yeah, why not? And I'll tell you a quick story to explain this. So I had a kid, and you know, in November, the parents come in, and the parents, I don't think you've heard this one yet. And the parents come in and they want to hear in a parent-teacher conference that their kid's going to Harvard and they're the most brilliant child that you've ever taught, right? So this one mother came in, and I had to say to her, he's struggling. He's really struggling to learn to read. He's struggling with math as well, and we got to figure out how to help him. And she burst into tears, and that's not unusual because, you know, a lot of them do that. But she then started talking about a situation at home of domestic violence. And so what do you think that little second grade boy was thinking about when he came in my classroom in the morning after hiding in the closet the night before because people were hitting each other? What's he thinking about? Is he thinking about reading? Is he learning phonics? Is he learning how to add and subtract? Of course not. So we have disrupted neurodevelopment. And then what happens is they get to 7th or 8th grade, and they can't read, and they can't do math. And what do you think 7th or 8th graders do when teachers call on them and they don't know the answer? Do you think they say, oh, I've experienced trauma, and I'm not going to be able to answer that question right now? No. A 7th or 8th grader usually acts out. They start being the class clown, or they ask to go to the bathroom, or they decide they're sick, or they skip the class altogether, but they don't talk to you about what's going on with them, right? So we end up with kids getting suspended, expelled, kicked out of school, and from there it goes downhill, right? A lot of people that get in trouble as children end up adopting behaviors that aren't necessarily healthy. And we also know that their brains are still developing, and that what happens to kids, particularly who experience trauma, is that their brains wire to have very quick stress reactions and reactions to trauma. So, for instance, y'all know how to ride a bike? Everybody here? Right? Yeah, I wouldn't get on one to save my life. I'd break a hip, but we won't go there. But if I were to get on one, I could probably remember that you pedal and you balance the bike, right? My brain has a pathway. Well, the same thing happens to people who have experienced trauma. Their brain has a very quick pathway that goes almost 0 to 60. They have a really quick stress reaction to things that others may be able to handle. They may not be as resilient. And one of the things people reach for is a way to feel better. And that is, we believe, possibly where the brain disease may start that causes people to be kind of primed. The pump is primed for some kind of process of addiction. But you don't have to have trauma to end up in this situation. It can be just the drugs themselves. Go ahead. That's enough of my trauma lecture. You can flip, because we don't need to go through all that. So let me explain real quickly how it's a brain disease, and I'm going to keep it simple. So there's in this part of your brain, there's a neurotransmitter, and a neurotransmitter means It's a chemical that sends messages from one nerve cell to the next. And the big one with opioid use disorder, there are a bunch of them, there are millions of, well, not millions, but there are a lot. The big one is called dopamine. And it sits there until it's released. And when it's released into that space between the nerve cells, it attaches to the next nerve cell and fires it. We all together here? And that exists in all parts of your body, but there's a whole lot of it in your reward system, if you can flip. So all of us have dopamine, and we need it because it's what makes us feel good when we hold a newborn baby or when we eat a good meal. And when we do those normal activities, or we go to the beach and we chill and we feel good, some dopamine's released in our brain. But if you take an opiate of any kind, whether it's prescribed or not, you're going to have a real release of dopamine. You're going to have all kinds of dopamine released. And that's why people feel so good and so ecstatic when they first start taking these drugs. It's just a chemical reaction, that's all it is. And for people that have had their pumps primed to not feel very good, it may even have a bigger effect. They're not able to say, I don't want this anymore, right? You keep taking it, you keep having that feeling. And eventually, it kind of goes south. Can you? So, opioids are ingested or put in your veins, and they bind to those receptors, release dopamine, and the person feels good. The second thing that happens, next slide, is they also bind, these opioids don't just go to your brain and hit this part of your brain. They go all over your body. That's why they use oxycodone for pain. I mean, if you have hip pain or whatever, they go all over your body. And one place they go is to this part of your brain that controls your breathing and your heart rate. And they shut it down. Now, there are other neurotransmitters involved. There's norepinephrine, there's GABA, there's glutamate. You don't want to hear all that, right? Unless you want to be here till midnight, so we won't do that. But basically, you take these opiates and you feel calmer in addition to feeling great. It slows your breathing, it slows your heart rate, it makes you feel less anxious. Okay? But what happens when it wears off? Well, your body is wired to survive, and when your body senses that you're not breathing enough, it starts making all the neurotransmitters that make you breathe, and it's trying to get you to breathe better, right? So when the opiates wear off, you were feeling calm, now you feel anxious. You were feeling very laid back, now you're feeling restless. You may even have diarrhea and muscle cramps. Those are the signs and symptoms of withdrawal. So what eventually happens to people? They have to take more and more of the medication in order to feel good, because your body starts producing less dopamine. Are y'all with me still? So you don't even experience as much pleasure in the normal things. You might go to the beach and be like, yeah, that's great, right? It's not pleasurable anymore. And you also have these withdrawal symptoms. And what drives people is that there is an actual chemical change in the brain that occurs, and people just don't want to be sick. It's called being dope sick. If you've ever seen anyone in withdrawal, it's worse than the flu. It's awful. You sweat. You're nauseous. I've sat with people who just vomit and vomit and vomit. They're shaking. It's sheer misery. It just is. And it's really hard to resist taking another drug when your brain is saying, I can't do this anymore. I can't be throwing up. I've got to breathe better, all of it, right? So you've changed your brain chemistry, and they actually call that a changed set point. Now, same thing happens if you're diabetic, where you develop insulin resistance and you have a changed set point, right? So your blood glucose goes up. It's no different in opioid use disorder. We have changed our neurotransmitters, our chemicals. We clear on that? It doesn't take very long either. And back in the day, because I'm really old, and when I was first a nurse, we didn't use, there was no oxycodone. It just didn't exist. We used morphine, and we used it only in severe pain, like post-surgically or end-stage cancer pain. Then in the 80s, I know I wasn't going to do this, but I have to do it briefly. In the 80s, they came out with, the pharmaceutical companies came out with the oxycodone, hydrocodone, and they said, wow, we can do this and people won't even get addicted to it. And they were handing it out like candy. And so if I'm prescribed something for 30 days, and that's all it takes for me to be stuck on it, to be, for lack of a better term, addicted to it, but it was prescribed, why would I think it's going to be a problem? You know, I'm not a doctor. You're not, are there any doctors here? Okay. So a lot of people ended up with an opioid use disorder just because it started with a prescription. A lot of people. Okay, I'll stop about that. Attachment theory. Next one. Okay, there was a study done on rats, like a long time ago. And what they did is they put these rats in a cage with water and water with an opioid in it. Which water do you think they went to? They started going to the water with the opiate in it. It made them feel good. They weren't drinking the plain old water anymore. Now, I get that they are rats and that we're not rats, but it illustrates a point. So then they put the same rats in another cage with a bunch of other rats, and they had rat toys, like, you know, like those wheels, and they had all kinds of stuff for them to play with. And there were other rats there for them to socialize with and have sex with and all those kinds of things. And did they go to the opiate water as much? No. We do know that social attachment has something, we don't have it all figured out yet, but something to do with the disease, and more importantly, something to do with recovery. People in recovery need to have social connections. They need to have people that care about them. They need for their family to be supportive in recovery. They need for their friends to be supportive in recovery. We know that social attachment is critical for recovery, just like it was for the rats. Next one. Social identity is a big thing too. We all want to pretend we're not still teenagers at heart, but we are. And people often tie their identity to their peers. So we hang out with people that use. We hang out with people in bars all the time. That's our social attachment, right? That's part of our social identity. Some people are tied to their persona, like a wild guy or a party girl or whatever that is. Some people identify their usage as being sort of a rebel. I'm a rebel. Maybe a rebel without a cause, but I'm a rebel. Some actually identify and get some kind of gain out of walking around saying, I'm an addict. You know, I'm a user. I'm a dealer. I'm a this. I'm a that. So there's that. And for people to recover, we have to give them a new identity. I see you shaking your head because you work in recovery. I know that. And it's absolutely true. We have to help people develop a new identity. That's part of the recovery process. Next. So we have genetics. You might have some, you might be behind the 8 ball there, but a lot of us are. I mean, if I'm not, please don't raise your hand, but if I asked, most people in this room have some mother, father, aunt, uncle, grandmother, grandfather, everybody who has a substance use issue. We know about attachment theory. We understand social connectedness, particularly in recovery. We know that trauma can be a big precursor. And you know, you may have a son or daughter, and you may say, they grew up great, there was no trauma. We don't know about all the trauma our kids experience. Teenagers don't tell us everything. They just don't. My kids are 40, and I'm still learning stuff about what they did and whatever. And we know that it's absolutely a brain disease. We have a changed set point. Our brain chemistry changes. Okay? Next. We're getting there. So it's a chronic and complex disease, and I just brushed the surface of it, but it is treatable. There's hope. There absolutely is hope. Go ahead. But before we get to the hope, let's talk about stigma for just a minute. What kind of time am I doing? Because I can... Okay. Stigma. Go ahead. If we tell people this is a choice you made, and you can make another choice, and you could stop tomorrow, and you can stop anytime you want, and it's just wrong, we are not supporting them in their recovery. We are just not. Criminalizing, just say no to drugs and putting them all in jail, did that work? No. Yeah, right. Unfortunately, I thought the brain disease model would do it, that just by explaining this to people, they would say, oh, that makes sense, and they'd stop stigmatizing, but no. Took me 2 years to get it across, even in my own family. They didn't want to believe me. No, it's a choice. I'm saying, no, it's not. Treatment providers. We have trouble with treatment providers. Some who still stigmatize it, right? And some who don't approve of harm reduction, which I'm going to get to in a couple of minutes. The abstinence-only language, and we can debate this all day. Of course, it's best to take no opioids. There's no question that would be the best thing for you. If you're not taking them, then don't. However, if you've already got your brain chemistry, if it's already been challenged with this disease, then maybe we should start looking at things like harm reduction. And I'm going to explain that in a minute. So when I get there, I'll go back to this one, okay? And the language we use. Let's not call people addicts. Let's not call them lowlifes and every other thing we can think of. These are human beings that are loved by their families or friends or treatment providers. They are human beings, and they deserve respect and dignity, the same as any other human being. Next. Brief word about opioids. Next. That was the plant, by the way. Oh, this got cut off. That's not good. Yeah. Well, here's the bottom line. I'll show it to you. About that much heroin will kill you. Fentanyl, just a few grains. Just a few grains. Does anyone know what carfentanil is? Anybody? Yes, you know? It's an elephant tranquilizer. How much of that do you think it takes? Now, who's putting the fentanyl in drugs? And by the way, it's not just in heroin. I have been asking the police, and I'll ask you, have you found it in other stuff? Oh, yeah. Even marijuana. From what I ask about every few weeks over at screening, because these guys drop people off at our door, and I say, hey, what do you, are you still finding it and everything? And they all say yes. And here's the thing, and I've had clients say this to me, but I trust my dealer. Wait, what? Okay, we got to talk about that a little bit. You don't know what they're putting in there. It hardly takes anything. It hardly takes anything. In fact, fentanyl is used in surgery, and there's a really narrow range where if you don't give enough, it won't work. But if you give too much, we end up with something called wooden chest syndrome. And that's where your muscles around your chest and your diaphragm literally stiffen and become like wood, and you can't breathe. Now, if that happens to you in surgery or in the hospital, they can handle it. They got ventilators, they got medication. If it happens to you over here at the Cumberland Farms, we don't have all that stuff to help you, do we? So it doesn't take much fentanyl, and you don't know what's in it. And the worst part that's happening now is there are these things called pill presses. You heard about them? So I can't because I don't have one, but you could make a Xanax or an Ativan, make it look like a Xanax or an Ativan. Exactly. It has the same markings on it. And you can buy those on the street. And how do I know you didn't put fentanyl in that? Right? Okay, next. What do we use if someone, what if someone you care about has an issue with opioids? Well, the first thing you do is get some Narcan. Where do you get Narcan? You mentioned at the pharmacies. That's true, but it costs money. Just saying, like $100 and something. But you can also get it at New Horizons, which isn't very far from here. And you walk in the front door of the building when you drive in, and I'm not advocating New Horizons here, I'm just telling you where you can get it. You go in the facility, and there's a building straight in front of you, and it kind of has a circular drive and an awning. Literally walk in there and go to the front desk and say, I need Narcan. And they're not going to take you in the back and say, why? What it is? They're not going to ask questions. They're going to say, okay, and they're going to make you learn how to use it, which takes 7 minutes, and they'll give it to you. They'll give you a box that has 2 doses in it. Now, if you look at that thing, it's a nasal spray. It's not like you have to inject something. It's a nasal spray. So if somebody is having an issue with they're almost not breathing or not breathing, all you do is lay them down, close one nostril, and pump that little middle thing, pump it all in their nose, all of it, all of it. Then flip them on their side. And I forgot one really important thing. Before you do any of that, call 911. Call 911, then administer the Narcan. Call 911, then administer. You will have a second dose. If they don't come to in 3 to 4 minutes, administer the second dose. If the person is not overdosing, it won't hurt them. If I collapse on the floor right now and you give me Narcan, it won't hurt me. If I collapse on the floor, it's probably a heart attack though, so I want you to start CPR, but the point is, it won't hurt me. And it will buy time. EMS cannot arrive at your door in 30 seconds unless they're driving down your street. In fact, ask New Horizons for 2 boxes. Then you'll have 4 doses. Why? And you can help me with this. It's often taking more than 2 doses because of the fentanyl. It used to be your grandmother's heroin, 1 dose would have been okay. But if you're, the stuff that's in there now, 1 dose may not do it.
Dr. Dreyer?
Yes.
As part of the task force, there was a gentleman with the Martin County EMS who approached me and shared that he had to use 16 doses of Narcan in Martin County for an overdose that he had arrived at. That's the highest number I've heard.
That's the highest number I've heard.
I've heard 7 to 8.
And EMS should have injectable. I don't know whether they do or not, but the police here, not some places they don't, but here you carry Narcan?
Yes.
Here. And I believe all along the Treasure Coast. I think it's Palm Beach, they're not carrying it, the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office, but that's for another day. If you have someone who has an opioid issue, get some Narcan, research treatment options, and fight the stigma. If you need to find treatment options in this area, dial 211. 211. Tell them somebody needs treatment for opioid use disorder. They can give you all the possible treatment options and phone numbers and all that kind of stuff. It's easy to remember, 211, right? That also works as a suicide hotline, in case you didn't know that. Next, please. So I went through this. I just messed up, though, and I forgot to say call 911 first. Are we all clear on that? Because if you administer and you don't call 911, they're not going to show up, and you got to call 911. Okay, go ahead. What you don't do, don't leave the person alone, even if you're the dealer, because you guys have is it Good Samaritan, where you don't arrest people when you go take care of an overdose victim, right? Don't put the person in the shower, because there's nothing about being clean that cleans the chemicals out of your brain. Don't give them coffee, because there's nothing about coffee that does that either. Don't have them walk around. That won't help. There's nothing about walking around that will get rid of those chemicals. And please, don't try to inject another substance. We see that. Oh, let's give them some meth. That'll wake them up. Okay, next. So how do you know someone you love is using drugs? And there's a whole list. I'm not going to read them to you, but go ahead. You can read them. There's a whole list. You're going to see mood swings, erratic sleep patterns, maybe changes in their appetite and weight, attempting to doctor shop. One of the ones I never knew about till I got into this is this, the itching. The itching. Your body has a histamine release when you take a foreign substance and they walk around like this. I see this all the time. You're going to see a lack of interest, withdrawal from friends and family, and all those other things. You might see your own medication getting stolen. Next. Behavioral signs, outbursts of anger, wearing long sleeves. I'm wearing them because I was cold, but whenever I have people come in to screening with any kind of suspicion, I go, show me your arms, because you might see marks, you might see abscesses. That's the other thing with opioid use disorder. It's not just the overdose that's a problem. People end up in the hospital with inflamed hearts, with blood infections, and all kinds of stuff. So you're going to see insomnia, defensiveness, poor judgment, maybe frequent accidents. Go ahead. Did you hit it? Vomiting, nausea, diarrhea, unsteady gait. What? Insomnia is huge. Because when the drug wears off, your body, remember we said it depresses your breathing and your heart rate and stuff, and it makes you calm and kind of slower moving? While that's happening, your body's saying, oh my gosh, I got to make more of these chemicals to wake my body up. So when the drug wears off, you've got too much of those chemicals that keep you awake. So you'll see the insomnia and withdrawal. Shakiness, tremors. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm not going to go through all that. So if someone is addicted, I went through this. I used that word. I'm sorry. If someone has opioid use disorder, please go get the Narcan. Please go get the Narcan. Dial 211 and get treatment options. Address the driving issue. And what do I mean by that? If the person doesn't want to hear about the consequences, and they don't, the driving issue might be that they just need you to care about them. And you have to show that. You have to do that. Kicking them out isn't going to be helpful. Cutting them off is not going to be helpful. Next. So what do we do in treatment? There are two things. You can either go to detox and not use anymore and hopefully go to NA or that, whatever. But we also use something called harm reduction. Now I'm going to ask you, anybody go to the beach around here since we live here? Do you ever go to the beach? Do you wear sunscreen? Why? Okay, you should. I don't either. I should, but you should. But what do you use sunscreen for? To prevent skin cancer, right? Did y'all wear a seatbelt when you came here? Yeah? I'm not sure about you. You didn't stop driving a car because you might get in a car accident, did you? But you do stop at red lights, and you do wear a seatbelt, and you should. That's harm reduction. You're doing something to reduce the possibility of fatality in a car by wearing a seatbelt. We do the same thing with people with opioid use disorder. Many people cannot go all the way to abstinence. They just can't get there. So we use something called medication-assisted treatment. And what that is it's providing you with medication to re-regulate your brain that I explained to you is way off. Now, I will tell you, there are treatment providers still out there, and you may run into one that'll say, oh, that's just replacing one opioid with another. Well, I'm going to tell you this. I wish somebody had replaced Katie's opioid with another because she'd still be here. And I'd rather have her on methadone or Suboxone than dead. I would do anything if somebody had done that. And I can't think of a better argument than that. So next. Methadone is an opioid. It is heavily regulated. You have to go to a methadone clinic for it, and you have to go every day. Next one. But Suboxone, it's also heavily regulated, but you can get Suboxone at treatment centers, including locally, New Horizons. If you don't have insurance, you can go there. You have to make an appointment. It might take a little while to get in. What Suboxone does is it hooks on to those receptors in the brain, but it doesn't activate them as well as fentanyl and heroin does, but it activates them enough so that you don't go into withdrawal, basically. And what people tell us is they feel normal when they're on Suboxone. So don't let a treatment provider tell you we don't use Suboxone because it's replacing an opioid with an opioid. It is partially, we call it a partial agonist. That's a big pharmacy word. So it's an opioid, but it doesn't act like oxycodone or like heroin. It's a partial action. And that way, you can feel regular, and then you can get treatment, and you can get counseling, and you can focus on the counseling and not on where do I get my next drug. So I highly recommend Suboxone. Next is a drug called Naltrexone, not to be confused with Naloxone, which is Narcan. And that's a shot. You get it once a month, and it blocks your receptors. So if you take an opioid, it won't do anything. Problem is you have to be off for a month before you can have that shot. So, and it's $1,400 a pop last I heard. Now the state provides some, but we don't have enough for everybody, so. Go ahead. Questions? Anybody have questions? And if not, I will turn this back over to Patty. Thank you for your attention. Oh, you have a question.
What percentage of people, whether it be overdose or just the negative, end up with a negative effect from opioids, start off with a prescription medication? Do you know that off?
I don't. I'll look it up for you. I'll check Dr. Google while I'm sitting there and get an answer to you, which would be the internet.
Second question.
But I don't know, but I know it's a large percentage. It's over 50%, but
Okay.
it could be 60, 70, 80, I'm not sure.
So knowing that it's at least 50%, why would the medical community continue
Well,
to push something
It-
they know is killing people?
there are two things.
Excuse me, the question was, remember
Oh,
I got it
sorry.
for recording. No, I slipped on the first one.
I can answer
My
that.
bad. The question is, what's the percentage of those who become addicted to an opioid from a prescription? And then the follow-up, which Dr. Dreyer is going to look into that for an answer. And then the second question is, if indeed it is that high, which is a good maybe 50 to 70%, which she will confirm shortly, why do the medical professionals continue to prescribe them?
Well, there is a place for them if you have severe cancer, for one thing. I mean, we don't want people to die in that horrible level of pain. So there is a place for pain management. There's a place for pain management post-surgically as well. If you've ever had surgery, it can be pretty brutal. What they're doing to stop this, though, is they aren't prescribing for as long. And then there's this thing called the Physician's Drug Monitoring Program. Prior to prescribing, you have to go, it's called eForce. You have to look it up, and you have to see if someone was prescribed by another doctor. So that's how, and it's a law that physicians do this, and nurse practitioners in Florida. So, but that didn't really become law until a couple of years ago. So we already had the problem. And one of the reasons that doctors were doing so much of it is back in the 80s, they were told by pharmaceuticals and at medical conferences. I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to defend them, but they were told you don't become addicted.
That's why
They were told. Yeah, that's what they were told. I'll get that number for you. I hope I'm not wrong, but I could be.
Thank you.
Okay.
We have another question.
Yes.
Well, I don't have a question. I have a response to your question. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for 20 years, and for me, I'm sorry, there's options to these drugs that we can take, because if I go into a hospital and say I don't want any narcotics, there's options. The sad part about it is there's a financial gain, and for us, we are missing that part, and no one wants to address that. I'll tell you right now, there's pills that a pharmaceutical company will make, and that pill is 25 cents. And you'll turn around and sell that same pill for $50.
Yeah.
So we have to address that.
I agree.
Because we do have options out there besides.
There weren't years ago, but there are now. I agree. Any other? Yes, sir?
What is New Horizons? Are they just local facility, or are they spread out from state or national?
We have to put it on.
What is New Horizons, and is it just a local facility?
Yes. New Horizons is on Midway Road, 4500 West Midway Road, next to the sheriff's office. It is a local facility, and it is a lot of their funding is state funding, so they're able to treat people who have no insurance or no money. There are other places on the Treasure Coast, but that would be the closest one to Port St. Lucie, and it's a single mental health substance use agency.
And what about getting Narcan and any other programs to get that with no cost?
For no cost, there are a couple places in Vero and Martin County, but I'm not sure the names of them. Okay, Right Life Services on US 1. Where? Okay. Okay. There are facilities that will give it away if you can't afford it, and those people can't at CVS and Walgreens. You could call 211 and ask as well. They know who funds.
So I was involved in a situation where I was responding to an overdose and was instructed by first responders to cease rescue breathing, and generally I would expect them to take it over, but they didn't give rescue breaths either, apparently due to risk of the person giving rescue breaths to ingest the substance themselves. Is there any truth to that, and do you know how great the risk is to somebody giving rescue breaths to an overdose victim?
There is that fear out there. It was a very rare occurrence that if there was any fentanyl powder around the person's mouth, you can always just use a napkin or something to cover it. But they, I'm sure, used other means to make sure the person was able to breathe. I don't know what they did. I wasn't there. Right. So they were able to. Yeah. And they would ask you to stop the rescue breaths while they always do. Even when we're doing CPR, they will say stop, switch, when they come into a place. So they would stop you.
No, Port St. Lucie has protective mask covers for administering rescue breaths. Our agency, Port St. Lucie Police Department, has protective masks as far as giving rescue breaths for CPR. But even just touching the substance, I heard recently of a lady that found a dollar bill on the floor and picked it up and had to be taken to the hospital. So it's even just touching it can.
I mean, I showed you it only takes a little bit. Yeah.
The invaluable mic. Good Lord. All right. Well, thank you for these great questions. We're going to move on just to the closing portion of our series. I hope everyone got as much out of Dr. Dreyer's presentation than I did when I first heard it 3.5 years ago. It is you don't get it, Dr. Dreyer, but it is such a practical yet understandable way to explain why this really is a disease of the brain. So if that's, again, if that's what you walk out of with this, from this presentation tonight, it will make my night, okay? Again, there is nothing about choice here. It is about a disease. But I did want to share, kind of close the evening with a couple of stories of how people with opioid use disorders have been impacted. Mine is the story of my family, of course. And this might resonate with many of you who have loved ones who are struggling with this disease. But as I mentioned at the top of it, Danny was in and out of a minimum of 14 rehabs and recoveries during the 8 years that he battled. My husband and I were there with him every step of the way. I've sat in countless numbers of support groups with those experiencing substance use. And the true struggle I have seen on these faces of, in my experience, it was young men, because I had a son, but they're not there because they choose to be. They're not in this rehab because they want to be. They're there because they're struggling for their life. They're fighting for their life, and they know that they have made that they have no one. They sit there in many of these family support groups. And they're all by themselves, and it's just so heartbreaking. I've also noted addiction isn't fair. Why my son caught it and others don't is a mystery to us. But we believe, I do, that Dan knew that fateful Friday night that he didn't want to continue living the way that he was. He had told me several times previously that he hated what he was doing to us and to him, and he abhorred the cycle of abuse, being clean one day, relapse the next, seek recovery, stay clean, release recovery over and over again. He hated living like he was. He wanted to be normal, but he just couldn't. So Danny's too short 22 years on this earth showed me one thing. The concepts of nature versus nurture go completely out the window when an opioid is involved. Danny was raised with morals and scruples. He knew right from wrong. He never hurt anyone other than continuously destroying himself, both physically and mentally. He was kind, he was thoughtful, he had a great sense of humor. But when faced with an opioid versus getting dope sick, which is what Dr. Dreyer talked about, he turned to the lure of the opioid. I've done a lot of reading on this subject. I'm a voracious reader. And one of the best books, most powerful books that I've read is called Dope Sick. And the author is Beth Macy, and I'm not going to, cite many of the stats from Beth Macy's book, but some of these are impactful. It says, if an opioid addict remains sober for 1 year, she has a 50% chance of relapsing. That's 1 in 2 chance of relapse. However, if she stays sober for 5 years, her chance of relapse is less than 15%. So the longer you can do it, the better off you are. And it, like Dr. Dreyer talked about, in 1898, Bayer's, you know, everyone knows Bayer, the baby aspirin, but Bayer's company doctor assured his fellow physicians, and this is a direct quote, "I have treated many patients for weeks with heroin without one observation that it may lead to dependency," end quote. Okay? Nothing is more powerful than the morphine molecule, and once it has its hooks in you, nothing matters more. Not love, not family, not sex, not shelter. The only relationship that matters is between you and the drug. And this one rang so true for myself and Danny and our family. The average non-addicted person's perception of the future is calculated to be 4.7 years. That's the non-addicted. Against an addicted user's idea of the future, which is 9 days. That is all Danny could see, was 9 days out. How do you plan? I don't know how you do that. So that was a huge fact. And at the end of the journey, Dr. Dreyer talked about it, and I can attest to it with my son. He wasn't going after heroin to get high, not anymore. He was going back to keep from getting sick or from feeling dope sick. Because that initial high, that's gone. You're just trying not to feel so horrible. And like, you know, once when Danny was in remission, which is my term for when he was sober for about 2 years straight, he and I had a great conversation right in my kitchen. When I opened the dialogue with, what do you think came first? Mental health issues, you know, challenges, or your substance use? And he really thought long and hard on it. And he felt strongly that the mental health issue for him, which was anxiety, that was the first one that he presented with, presented itself first. And then he began to self-medicate. As his mother, I didn't see it. I mean, I saw the anxiety, but I thought, you know, again, 14, 15, 16 years old, that's understandable. I mean, he was active in sports until, you know, mid high school, but I didn't see the anxiety and the depression that he suffered. And for that, I harbor deep regrets. And so you see, that's why I'm here, to learn more about mental health issues so that I can help others who may be in need. And do I believe, like Dr. Dreyer shared with us on trauma, do I believe Danny suffered from trauma in his 2 short years? Yeah, I do. Do I think it's like what Dr. Dreyer talks about? Do teens come home and open their heart and explain, you know, share everything that they do? No. So that, I don't know, but I believe he did. Do I think that the trauma impacted his sobriety and gave him a propensity to self-medicate with drugs? Yeah, I do. Do I feel the constant 8-year battle of the roller coaster ride of sober, relapse, detox, recovery, and then do it all again? Push Danny to attempt to die from suicide that Friday night? Maybe. I don't know. I will never know. But as a voracious reader, I know too well of the countless families that are impacted, and some devastatingly so, due to the trauma they or their loved one has experienced. And now, throughout these days since the pandemic and its impacts as it continues, our world is moving faster than ever. Technology has exploded, and our means of connectivity is vastly different from how our parents before us connected. So many of us, due to circumstances outside of our control, feel isolated and unconnected with our loved ones and our colleagues. But opioid epidemic awareness is an important and critical topic that we have to talk about. And being in the middle of a pandemic does heighten our emotions, and they aren't always expressed in a healthy manner. And the last, before I turn it over to one more very, very, very powerful testimonials, I will share this much. My husband and I will never be the same. You just will not. You aren't. Every day we remember Danny for what he was to us. Danny was a good son who had a debilitating disease. Perhaps one day I'll be able to look back at the time that Danny spent with us and say thank you to God for those 2 short 22 years. But for now, while I don't want his life defined by his addiction, I will be stepping out, as I am tonight, to reduce the stigma that is attached to opioid addiction. If this disease can impact a Danny, a Katie, and so many others in our community, it can and does hit everyone. It is the equal employment opportunity disease. Because at the end of the day, if we had been more open about it, perhaps with Dan's problems, someone could have either gotten through to him or through us, through counseling. But we didn't, and no one did. And now Danny's dead. But I hope, it is my fervent hope, that through awareness events like this, that we can help to save one Danny in the future. And if I can't do that, if I can just get one young man to say no to an opioid for the first time, this has all been worth the journey. So I want to take one moment to thank Dr. Dreyer, to thank Officer Jackson for sharing their story. And next, because this will rock your world here, I want to, no pressure at all, but I do want to turn the mic over to a young lady named Tiffany Graves. She is a St. Lucie County resident, and she is here to tell her own story. Ms. Graves.
Hi, my name is Tiffany, and I am a recovering addict. And I like to call myself an addict. Okay. Because it keeps it real for me. Okay. I don't ever want to forget where I've been. Try not to get emotional. So I don't know who's in the room tonight or why they're here, but I thought about okay, well, maybe there's going to be some addicts in there also, or maybe they're just members of the community, but I'm just going to tell my story. So I come from a really good family. My father is actually a retired major on the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Department. My father started DARE here. He started drug court here. So if anybody was taught about the harms of drugs, it was definitely me. My mom worked at the college. I have a younger brother. We have lawyers in the family, very successful people. So for me to get to this place, it was really uncomfortable at times. But anyway, I started out like most teenagers, just experimenting. I didn't realize then, but I do now in hindsight, that my friends would drink and try pot, but it affected me differently. I was the one who always took it way too far, blacking out at 15 years old on Goldschlager. My friends weren't doing that. Taking unnecessary risks, just always pushing the limit. And it caught up with me. It was all fun and games for a while. And there's a lot of substances that are part of my story, but this is about opiates. So like most people who have an opiate addiction, it started with prescription medication when I was 16 years old and I got my wisdom teeth taken out. They didn't tell us to taper it off, and I found myself shaking in the bathroom floor, throwing up violently and all that stuff, but I liked it. I liked the way it made me feel. It made me more outgoing. I thought I was a better friend, and I cared about people more, and I was more talkative and all this stuff. So I started raiding my parents' medicine cabinet for pain pills. And then I got into a car accident, and I messed up 2 discs in my back, and I got put on Oxycontin. And that's when it really got bad. Of course, I'm dabbling with other stuff as well. But like you were saying, it becomes, and I was prescribed it, and I was taking it as prescribed for a long time. But then you need more, and you need more, and it's not working like it used to work. I was even a part of the whole pill mill days. So then I was just finding ways to get more pills and more pills until somebody was just like, here, try some heroin. You know, it works so much better. You'll feel so much better. And I had legitimate pain, or so I thought. But there was a lot more going on than I realized. So yeah, I started shooting up heroin. And you know, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And now throughout all of this, like, I could get clean and I would stop. And I had really good jobs. I mean, I've gone from, I'm not like some addicts. Like, I've been around the world, private planes, worked with billionaires. Like, I can go way up here, super classy, and I can go way down here, super trashy. So I'm all over the place. You know, in and out of rehabs, I don't even know how many rehabs or detoxes I've been to. I have certifications in all kinds of stuff. I'm a nurse, real estate agent, flight attendant. Like, I can do it all, but I can throw it away really quick. It doesn't matter how much you have, all the good things in your life, it all gets taken away. You don't care. You don't care because there's something wrong inside. And we don't know it and we don't realize it until things get really bad. I tried the maintenance thing. It worked for a little bit, but until you deal with those core trauma issues, it just continues to spiral. And the things that we need don't work like they used to. We need more and more and more because now more trauma keeps happening, more bad things keep happening. So we need the drugs even more and more and more and more, and it's just getting worse and worse until we end up in jail, which is what happened to me. You know, my dad being who he was, I got out of a lot of trouble. And I probably should have went to jail when I was like 16 years old, but that never happened. So it wasn't until I was 38 years old that I got arrested. I had been so strung out on drugs for so long that I had started hallucinating. And so I was in like a state of psychosis, and I ended up going to Nelson's on Midway Road, and I called the police on myself several times, and I waited for them to come, and I thought demons were chasing me, so it was crazy. I waited for the police to show up. I thought I was saved. I spent 73 days in jail, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And you can, unfortunately, like, there's a lot of things I heard tonight that I agree with, but there's some things that I disagree with too. You can love people to death. Sometimes you have to let them fall. Rehab's great. Jail, that works too. But it has to get so bad that the person wants it on their own and is willing to do anything it takes to get there. So if you guys have anybody in your family, it's real hard. That the enabling and helping and all of that, it's a fine line. I'd be happy to talk with anybody after the meeting. But for me, what worked was something that had been there the whole time, these 12-step programs. AA, NA, I choose AA. I just related with it more, not because of the alcohol, but because of the way they address the issues and how they go about addressing the issues. The 12 steps are what saved my life. I think every person in the world should have to take a 12-step program, and there's all kinds of them out there. The world would be such a better place if everybody had to take the 12 steps. It's, you know, and it's free. It's free. Finding a sponsor, putting a little bit of work. I mean, it's actually a lot of work, but it's not that bad. To find out who you are, what happened to you, why you look at things the way you do, and changing your perspective on it. Realizing that I was at the root of all my troubles and how to turn it around. That might sound like, I don't know if anybody knows about the 12 steps, so I might just be going on and on about something that nobody understands, but it's the best thing that ever happened. And then on top of that, you know, you turn around and you help other people. So like, I hate public speaking, and thank God there's only a few people in here because I was really freaking out. But like, this is one of the things that we do to give back. Drug addiction, all of it, it affects everybody. Now my brother is suffering. And he was the good kid. You know, he was the one that never got in trouble. Never had a speeding ticket. You know, a freaking attorney. Like, it's crazy. It affects everyone. And you don't have to have trauma. I didn't have trauma. Like, nothing, I wasn't molested, I wasn't raped, I didn't have like a reason to turn to drugs. I just liked the way it made me feel. And I took it too far. And the opiates, you know, they are prescribed, so they're legal and you're not doing anything wrong. So, and now it's just so dangerous. It's not, I'm glad I got out when I did. I got out right when fentanyl started to become a real issue. But fentanyl is bad. And they have the carfentanil, and now there's another one, I think it's called Trank something or other. And that Narcan doesn't even work on that. And I think that's real bad up north. I don't know if it's made its way down here, but when it does, it's going to be terrible. But anyway, I don't know what else to say. I'm just grateful that my journey brought me to a rock bottom, and there is no rock bottom. The rock bottom keeps getting lower and lower and lower until you die. So there's that. Love and support the people you have who are addicted. But you gotta let them find their own way.
Please, everyone, a warm, warm round of applause. You don't know how hard that is. I mean, I can't fathom it. It's her story. I'm telling Danny's. That is a tough, tough story. You are so brave. You are so strong, and I am so proud to know you. So thank you for coming to share with us. This man had a question. Okay.
First of all, I want to say I am so proud of you. And you are my daughter. I lost my daughter in 2019 to fentanyl. I'll tell you, it's nothing like having a Ring camera at your home and you're in Texas and you see Port St. Lucie Police Department putting yellow tape around your home and you're not close. On April 12th, my daughter was in the house with her son. I'll back up a little bit. Kira had a problem with drugs from when she was 16. And when she was 25, she got pregnant and she cold turkey stopped. She stopped everything. And she moved back in, and she moved back in with my grandson, Cadence, and she was doing fine. So one day out the blue, she just started Googling how to use fentanyl. How I know this, the police and me went through her phone. She was just Googling it. So with her, and at that time Cadence was a year and a half, she tried fentanyl for the first time. And she died in my kitchen with my grandson there. My grandson was alone with her for 6 hours. And the police came and they said it's a miracle he didn't get the fentanyl on her. and I'm being graphic because I think I came here to help somebody. Because see, when you die of like that, your lungs restrict and the blood comes up and the blood comes out of your nose. So I'm in Texas and I knew something was wrong, and I'm calling, but no one wasn't answering the phone. But then I saw somebody ring my doorbell. It was a lawn man, and they couldn't get in. And I was wondering, why were they standing at my door for so long? And I never figured it out. What happened was my 1-year-old son was on the other side banging on the door, and they didn't know, so they thought someone was there, so they just walked away. And the way we figured it out was he had blood on his hand, and her blood was on the door for 6 hours. So this fentanyl thing it's nothing to play with, and I told myself I wanted to come here not only to hear you guys, but to contribute. I think this is something I want to contribute towards going forward. And like I said, you saved yourself, and I'm proud of you. And there's a lot of ladies and men out there, young men like you, that I think as a group, if more people would get together, we could save them. And it's a shame that we have something like this and so few people turn out. This is something where, as many cases that we have in Port St. Lucie, this room should be full. And we need to do a better job, okay? But again, thank you, and I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Tiffany, good to hear you. Thanks for sharing. And thanks for your story also. Very briefly, my name's Juliet Nelson. I've lived in PSL for about 6 years now. I lost my soulmate, the love of my life, and my husband of 24 years to opioids. I've been clean and sober for 31 years. I really identified with your story. Thanks for sharing. He had about 20 years clean before he picked up again. And we'll never know why he started using again. Sometimes for an addict, even in recovery, you can just think it seems like a good idea. I watched his personality change, his finances change, and he was no longer the man I used to know. He'd become a liar and a miserable person. Opioids dictated his every move. He'd often have to run out for cigarettes at very inappropriate times, like when we had guests over for dinner. And I realize now that he had to meet his dealer, which was the one and only priority in his life at that point. When he did admit to me, I can't do this anymore, and had a breakdown, he went to a detox, went to a residential program, but I know now that he went right back to the opioids afterwards. He was on Suboxone for a while. I don't know if he adhered to it as prescribed. Sometime after that, I asked him to leave the house because I didn't want to live with an addict. And Tiffany, I too had a little trouble with the language that I heard here tonight, driving issue. Because to some point, you have to take care of yourself. You can't enable people anymore. But that's for another conversation. In the months that followed, I learned that he went to 3 detoxes to try to stop. But the draw of opioids was so high that it drew him back every time. And it really breaks my heart to think about the hell his life had become. We had a beautiful life together, beautiful home, vacations, restaurants, love. We did a wellness check after I asked him to leave the house. And the cops found him dead, and he died of an opioid overdose laced with fentanyl this January. And we've learned a lot here tonight. Opioids do not discriminate. We know there's help there. I want to leave it with a message of hope But we also know that it's a brain disease, and it rewires your brain. He desperately didn't want to use anymore. He hated himself. But before he could find that light again, after so many years of recovery, he chose to end his life. Thank you for letting me share. I just hope that, like you said, the message somehow helps someone somewhere, and if I can help save one life somehow, that would be very important to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think we're... Oh, yeah, we're over. Thank you so much for your story, and anyone else here who might have one. It does not get easy. And I agree with you, sir. I'm a little bit, how do I say it? Because we've done these opioid events this is our fourth one, I think, Dr. Dreyer, since 2019. But it always is a bit dismaying to me that of a community of 217,000 people, and when I hear the law enforcement numbers during the task force that they're reporting, that this is what we get. That's just dismaying to me. 1 second. And the only thing I would offer out is, moving from here, share this evening with anyone else. I'm not saying we have the answer to it, but you can become educated, and that's what needs to happen. Sir, your question.
Speaking to the audience numbers, how do you advertise it? I just happened to see this on the news about 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Awesome.
Find out about it. That's the only reason I'm here.
Awesome.
So how do you advertise this type of event?
Actually, we do promote it throughout our facilities. We do promote it on social media through our communications department. We are the city, so it's not like we have a ton of funding for advertising. I acknowledge that. And yes, we did a media release this year to the different news stations, and some of them did pick it up to promote that as well. Before I move, because that is a very good question, and yes, we do have room for improvement there. But again, I know we're out there. It's on our marquee out front. It's been on there for a month, okay? It's on, I believe it is, on the marquee on US 1 at the event center. So it's there, okay? People just need to read it or become involved. But let's continue this journey, because your daughter needs to be remembered, and my heart breaks for your family and her son. But this young lady, that's why I was so warmed by her testimonial, because there is hope. There is. For my son, no, there wasn't. But there is hope, and so that's the good thing of it. 2 things that I would, before we close for the night. I would offer out, we're also hosting our 2nd year of the International Overdose Awareness Day event. And that is always held every August 31st. This year it's a Wednesday. We had it last year for the first time. No, I'm going to get to you. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I was getting to you, though. So it's Wednesday, August 31st at 7 p.m., and it will be at Veterans Park at Rivergate, which is our boat ramp park, if you will, on Westmoreland. And I encourage you to come out if you have any loved ones that you have lost due to overdose. It's a beautiful event. It's free, of course, but it's a brief event. It's only like 90 minutes. But we do a candlelight procession along the boardwalk, along the beautiful St. Lucie River, and then we'll have a reading of the names. And that's always a very poignant portion. Ma'am? There will be, I've actually gotten quite a few inquiries to our front desk. There will be that night, I have name cards that will be right there at the event as you walk in, and with pens, and you just write down your loved one's name. You're welcome to bring photos. We also have the opportunity of bringing old shoes or sandals or sneakers or whatever from your loved one, because we will have a display. That's kind of a showing of how many we have lost due to this horrible disease. But there'll be the reading of the names is really a poignant piece of it. The one thing I do ask is there is a line for you to spell it phonetically. I'm going to be the one up there calling the names. So if it's a tougher name, just put the phonetic spelling of the name is what I ask. But last year, it was our first time event, and we had close to 200 people. So, sir, to your point, I was warmed by that, that we had 200 for a first time event. But again, I know there's a lot more than 200 people who have lost loved ones, certainly on the Treasure Coast. So feel free to, spread the word, encourage people to come to it. It's a great event. It's very solemn. And then the last thing I would mention before we adjourn is the next session of HealthyU will be held right here in this room on September, I don't even know what month I'm in anymore, September 7th at 6:30 p.m. And the topic there is another tough one, but it's suicide awareness. And we need to talk about that. I'm hearing more and more suicide than we all need to. So the presenter there will be Ann Posey, who's a licensed medical provider from Cleveland Clinic Indian River Hospital. So please come down and stop by and see us for suicide awareness. And again, I want to thank you all for your time, your efforts, your stories, your powerful stories, and testimonials to this disease. So thank you for coming.